Parrot alerts about baby medicated by cruel nanny. When it reveals what the nanny was planning, please listen until the end to be amazed by this story. Percy's feathers rustled as he watched the scene unfold in the elegant living room. His amber eyes tracked Nancy's every move as she roughly handled baby Alicia, her actions hidden from the security cameras by carefully chosen blind spots. The parrot shifted uneasily on his perch, distressed by what he witnessed day after day. Paul and Martha had adopted Percy years ago, long before Alicia came into their lives. The couple worked demanding hours at their respective medical practices, which led them to hire Nancy as Alicia's full-time nanny. On the surface, she appeared perfect, experienced, well-recommended, and always properly dressed. But Percy knew better. When Paul and Martha were home, Nancy was the picture of devotion, cooing at Alicia, singing lullabies, and providing detailed reports of their daily activities. The moment they left, however, her demeanor changed completely. Her gentle voice became harsh, her tender touches turned rough, and baby Alicia's cries were met with cruel indifference. Percy had always been an unusually perceptive bird, picking up on subtle changes in mood and behavior. His previous owner, an elderly language professor named Thomas, had spent years teaching him not just to mimic words, but to understand context and meaning. Now those lessons served a vital purpose as Percy observed the mounting tension in the household. The parrot noticed how Alicia would wail in distress whenever Nancy entered the room, how she would grab her tiny arms too tightly when moving her, and how she would ignore her cries for hours. But what troubled Percy most were the whispered phone conversations he overheard late at night when Nancy thought everyone was asleep. "The plan is almost ready," she would murmur into her phone, pacing near Percy's cage. "Once I get access to their accounts, yes, I know what to do with the baby. No one will suspect anything." Percy's vocabulary was extensive, but he struggled to find the right words to communicate the danger. He tried various phrases: bad lady, baby crying, help needed, but Paul and Martha merely thought he was mimicking random phrases, as parrots often do. Their dismissal of his warnings only made Percy more determined to expose the truth. One evening, while Martha was feeding Alicia before bedtime, Percy noticed Nancy in the kitchen, mixing something into the baby's formula. His heart raced as he watched her carefully measure drops from a small, dark bottle, her movements precise and deliberate. The parrot's instinct screamed that this was wrong. That night, Percy made a decision. He had to find a way to protect Alicia, no matter the cost. But how could a parrot convince humans of such a serious threat? As darkness fell over the house, Percy remained awake, his mind working through possible solutions, while Nancy's shadowy figure moved through the rooms below, preparing for whatever sinister plan she had in motion. Julia, Martha's sister who lived nearby, would sometimes visit with her daughter Bella. Percy noticed how Nancy's behavior would shift subtly during these visits, a flash of annoyance crossing her face when Julia appeared unannounced, the way she would hover nearby during conversations, and how she would quickly redirect any questions about Alicia's care. As Percy watched Nancy closing the curtains for the night, he caught a glimpse of her true expression in the window's reflection, a cold, calculated look that sent chills through his feathers. The parrot knew time was running out. Tomorrow he would have to find a way to make them understand, or Alicia might face consequences too terrible to imagine. The weight of this knowledge kept Percy alert as the house settled into silence. Through the darkness he could hear Alicia's soft breathing from the nursery, punctuated by Nancy's footsteps as she moved around downstairs. The parrot's keen ears picked up the sound of drawers opening, papers rustling, and the quiet beep of a phone being used. What Percy didn't realize was that his chance to expose the truth would come sooner than expected, and in a way that would shock everyone in the household. As the night deepened, he remained vigilant, knowing that tomorrow would bring either salvation or disaster for the innocent baby sleeping nearby. Morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. Percy watched as Martha prepared for another busy day at the hospital, her movements hurried but gentle as she kissed Alicia goodbye. Paul had already left for an early surgery, leaving Nancy in charge once again. The parrot's anxiety grew as he observed the Nanny-S practice transformation, her warm smile dropping the moment Martha's car disappeared from view. "Time for your medicine, little one," Nancy cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she approached Alicia's high chair. Percy noticed she wasn't carrying the usual medication prescribed by the pediatrician. Instead, she pulled out the mysterious dark bottle from the previous night. Alicia began crying immediately, as if sensing something wrong. Her tiny hands pushed away the bottle Nancy pressed against her lips. "Stop being difficult," she hissed, her gentle facade cracking. "Just drink it." Percy couldn't contain himself any longer. "No! Bad! Poison!" he screeched, flapping his wings frantically. The sudden outburst startled Nancy, causing her to drop the bottle. It shattered on the kitchen floor, its contents spreading in a sinister puddle. Nancy's face contorted with rage. "Stupid bird," she snarled, advancing toward Percy's cage. "You've been watching me too closely, haven't you?" Her fingers gripped the cage bars tightly. "Well, we'll have to do something about that." Just then, Julia's voice called from the front door. "Hello? Anyone home?" She had a habit of dropping by unannounced, much to Nancy's constant irritation. The nanny quickly composed herself, kicking the broken glass under the cabinet and wiping the spilled liquid with her shoe. "We're in the kitchen," Nancy called back, her voice honey-sweet once again. Percy watched as she hastily cleaned up the evidence, noting how she stuffed the glass shards into her pocket rather than the trash. Julia entered with young Bella in tow, carrying a basket of fresh muffins. Her eyes immediately went to Alicia, who was still crying. "Is everything okay?" "She seems upset." "Oh, she's just being fussy about her breakfast," Nancy explained smoothly. "You know how babies can be." She lifted Alicia from her high chair, bouncing her with apparent affection. But Percy noticed something else, a small notebook that had fallen from Nancy's pocket during her hasty cleanup. It lay partially hidden under the kitchen table, its pages containing what looked like numbers and notes in her precise handwriting. While the women chatted, Bella wandered over to Percy's cage. The young girl had always been fascinated by the parrot, often sharing secrets with him during her visits. "Hello, Percy," she whispered, slipping him a piece of her muffin through the cage bars. Percy saw his opportunity. "Help Alicia," he whispered back, remembering how Thomas had taught him to string words together meaningfully. "Bad lady hurts baby." Bella's eyes widened. Unlike the adults who dismissed Percy's warnings as random chatter, children often paid more attention to animals. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. "Poison in bottle," Percy continued, his voice low but urgent. "Notes under table." Bella glanced at the kitchen table, noticing the notebook with the casual curiosity of a child. She walked over and picked it up before anyone could stop her. "What is this?" she asked innocently. Nancy's reaction was instant and violent. She practically shoved Alicia into Julia's arms and lunged for the notebook. "That's private," she snapped, her careful mask slipping again. The sudden movement and harsh tone made Alicia wail louder, and even Bella stepped back in surprise. Julia, still holding the crying baby, noticed the strange tension in the room. "Is everything all right, Nancy? You seem different." "So everything is fine then," Nancy insisted, clutching the notebook to her chest. But her composed facade had cracked, revealing something darker underneath. "I think it is time for Alicia's nap. Perhaps you could visit another time." Julia didn't move. Instead, she looked more closely at Alicia, noticing for the first time the slight bruising on her arms where Nancy had gripped her too tightly. Her maternal instincts, already aroused by the tense atmosphere, went into higher alert. "I think I'll stay for a while," Julia said firmly, her voice taking on a steely edge that Percy had never heard before. "In fact, I might call Martha and see if she can come home early today." Nancy's expression shifted again, calculating and cold. "That one to be necessary. I have everything under control." She reached for Alicia, but Julia took a step back. "Bella, honey," Julia said calmly, though her eyes never left Nancy. "Why don't you go call Aunt Martha? Use my phone. It is in my purse by the door." Percy watched the scene unfold with growing tension. He could see Nancy's hands twitching, her eyes darting between Julia, Alicia, and the front door. The notebook she held contained evidence of something. Perhaps her plans, her true intentions, or worse. "Hurt, baby!" Percy screeched again, louder this time. "Bad lady poison!" "That bird has been nothing but trouble," Nancy said, her voice tight with anger. "Always making noise, interfering with Alicia asleep. I've suggested to Martha that we should get rid of it." "Really?" Julia replied, her suspicion growing. "Martha loves that parrot. She has had Percy for years, and she has never mentioned anything about getting rid of him." The tension in the kitchen was broken by the sound of Bella's voice from the hallway. "Aunt Martha, can you come home? Something wrong with Nancy." Nancy's composure shattered completely. She made a sudden move toward the front door, but Julia blocked her path. "You were not going anywhere until Martha gets here," Julia declared, her free arm extended to prevent Nancy from passing. Percy watched as Nancy's face transformed into something truly frightening. Gone was any pretense of the caring nanny, replaced by a calculating coldness that confirmed every suspicion he had. "You do not understand," Nancy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This was supposed to be perfect. I had everything planned. The baby would get sick, nothing too serious at first, but with my special medicine she would get worse instead of better. Paul and Martha would be devastated, too distracted to notice the missing money until it was too late." Julia gasped, instinctively holding Alicia tighter. "You were going to poison—" "A bad lady poison, baby," Percy screeched again. The sound of a car screeching to a halt outside made everyone freeze. Footsteps pounded up the front walk. Martha had arrived home in record time, likely breaking several speed limits in the process. The scene she burst in on would be forever etched in her memory. Julia backing away from Nancy, clutching Alicia protectively, Bella hiding behind her mother, Percy flapping and screeching in his cage, and Nancy, looking nothing like the caring nanny she pretended to be, holding a notebook full of secrets that were about to be revealed. The next few moments would change everything, but Percy knew his job wasn't finished. There were still darker truths to be uncovered, and the full extent of Nancy's plans had yet to come to light. The parrot watched intently as Martha took in the scene before her, knowing that the real storm was just beginning. Martha stood frozen in the doorway, her medical coat still on, stethoscope dangling from her neck. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. Her eyes darted between her sister holding Alicia, Nancy's threatening stance, and Percy's agitated state. "What is going on here?" Martha demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to handling crisis situations. Before anyone could answer, Percy's voice rang out clear and precise, shocking everyone with its clarity. "She hurts, baby. Poison in bottle. Look under cabinet." The parrot's words were unmistakable this time, no longer random phrases but a coherent warning. Martha's eyes widened as she processed this unexpected revelation. Nancy lunged for her purse, but Julia was quicker. "Bella, grab that bag," she called to her daughter. The young girl snatched Nancy's purse just as the nanny reached for it, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered items was a collection of vials, syringes, and what appeared to be hospital prescription pads. Martha gasped as she recognized the labels on the vials. As a doctor, she knew exactly what they were: powerful sedatives and medications that should never be anywhere near a baby. "Those are from my hospital," she whispered, the horror of realization dawning on her face. "How did you get these?" Nancy's composure cracked completely. Her laugh was hollow and bitter. "You doctors think you're so clever, don't you? Always too busy saving other people's lives to notice what's happening in your own home. Did you know your precious Alicia cries for hours when you're gone? That she flinches when I come near her?" Julia held Alicia tighter, noting the slight tremor in her tiny body at the sound of Nancy's voice. The baby's reaction spoke volumes about what she had endured. "Check her notebook," Percy squawked insistently. "Numbers. Plans." Martha picked up the fallen notebook, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. Inside were detailed notes about the family's schedule, bank account numbers, and what appeared to be calculations for steadily increasing doses of various medications. "It was perfect," Nancy spat, her facade completely gone now. "I had access to everything. Your home, your baby, your accounts. The plan was simple. Make the baby sick slowly. just enough to worry you but not enough to raise suspicion. While you were distracted with her declining health, I would handle your finances, your bills, your accounts. Handle our accounts? Martha's voice was barely a whisper. Your signatures weren't hard to forge, Nancy continued, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. And grieving parents rarely check their bank statements carefully. By the time Alicia's condition became critical, I would have transferred enough money to disappear completely. The devastated parents would be too broken to notice the missing funds until it was far too late. The sound of Alicia's whimper cut through the tension like a knife. Martha took a step forward, her professional calm warring with maternal fury. "How many times?" she demanded. "How many times did you hurt my baby?" Nancy's silence was more damning than any answer could have been. Percy, however, had more to reveal. "Night medicine, bad medicine. Show them, show them." Julia's eyes narrowed. "What is he talking about?" "The cabinet," Bella piped up, remembering Percy's earlier warning. He said to look under the cabinet. Martha dropped to her knees, reaching under the kitchen cabinet where Nancy had kicked the broken bottle earlier. Her hand emerged with shards of dark glass, still wet with an unknown liquid. "What was in this bottle?" Martha's voice was deadly quiet. Before Nancy could respond, the front door opened again. Paul had arrived, likely called by Bella when she contacted Martha. His presence seemed to trigger something in Nancy, perhaps the realization that her carefully constructed plan was completely unraveling. "You don't understand," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "So this wasn't just about the money. I wanted to prove a point. All you wealthy doctors with your perfect lives thinking you can buy good childcare like you buy everything else. You never really checked my references, did you? Never really verified my credentials." Paulie's face drained of color. As if in answer to his unspoken question, Percy began rattling off names. Sarah Thompson, Michael Anderson, Baby James. Names that meant nothing to the family but clearly meant something to Nancy, judging by her reaction. "Shut up!" she screamed at the parrot. "Shut up! Shut up!" But Percy wouldn't be silenced. "Other babies, other families, look them up." Martha pulled out her phone with trembling hands, quickly searching the names Percy had spoken. Her face grew paler with each search result. They were all families who lost babies under mysterious circumstances. All of them had nannies who disappeared afterward. The revelation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Nancy wasn't just a fraud. She was something far more sinister, a systematic predator who had made a career out of targeting wealthy families, harming their children, and disappearing with their money. Paul moved with surprising speed for someone who had just finished a long surgery. He positioned himself between Nancy and the door, his voice steady despite the anger evident in his eyes. "The police are already on their way. Julia called them right after she contacted Martha." Nancy's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. She seemed to be calculating her chances, weighing her options. The sound of distant sirens made her decision for her. She bolted toward the back door, but she hadn't counted on Percy. The parrot had been watching, waiting for just such a moment. As Nancy ran past his cage, he extended his wing through the bars, catching her sleeve. The unexpected snag was enough to throw her off balance. She stumbled, crashing into the kitchen table. The fall sent her sprawling to the floor, the contents of her pockets scattering across the tile. Among them was a small USB drive that skittered under the refrigerator. Percy's sharp eyes caught its trajectory. "Evidence," he screeched. "Under fridge, more proof." The sirens were getting closer now. Nancy lay on the floor, the fight seeming to drain out of her as she realized there was nowhere left to run. But there was something in her eyes, a cold, calculating look that suggested this wasn't over yet. The police were pulling up outside, their red and blue lights painting the kitchen walls in alternating colors. But Percy kept his eyes fixed on Nancy, remembering something he had overheard during one of her late-night phone conversations, something about a backup plan and insurance. The parrot had a feeling they hadn't uncovered all of Nancy Onwest's secrets yet, and the worst might be yet to come. Martha held Alicia close, tears streaming down her face as she examined every inch of her baby, cataloguing any signs of abuse or neglect she might have missed. Paul stood guard over Nancy, his doctor's oath to do no harm visibly warring with his paternal instincts. But it was Julia who noticed something odd about the way Nancy was lying on the floor. Despite her fall, despite being caught, there was a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. It was the smile of someone who knew something others didn't, someone who still had cards left to play. As the police entered the kitchen, Percy ruffled his feathers uneasily. His warnings had helped expose Nancy's immediate plans, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. The parrot watched as the officers began to secure the scene, knowing that his job as protector wasn't finished yet. Whatever Nancy was still hiding, whatever her backup plan entailed, Percy would remain vigilant until all her secrets were exposed and Alicia was truly safe. The kitchen had transformed into a crime scene. Police officers photographed evidence, while detectives interviewed family members. Alicia had been taken to the hospital for a thorough examination, with Martha accompanying her. Paul remained behind to assist with the investigation, his medical expertise proving valuable in identifying the various substances found in Nancy's possession. Percy watched from his cage as an officer retrieved the USB drive from under the refrigerator. His sharp eyes hadn't missed how Nancy's slight smile had widened when they plugged it into a laptop. Something wasn't right. "Careful! Trap! Trap!" Percy screeched, but his warning came too late. The moment the drive was accessed, every computer in the house began emitting a harsh beeping sound. Screens flickered and went dark, and the home security system suddenly deactivated. "It's a virus," one of the officers announced. "She's wiped everything. Security footage, computer files, everything that could have contained evidence of her activities." But Nancy's satisfaction was short-lived. Julia stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Not everything," she said. "I've been recording since I arrived this morning. Every confession, every threat, it's all here." The smirk vanished from Nancy's face. She hadn't counted on Julia's quick thinking, hadn't factored in the protective instincts of a sister who had sensed something wrong the moment she walked in. Meanwhile, Bella tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mum, remember when Percy started talking to me? I did what you always taught me. I took notes in my diary, everything he said, everything I saw." The detective's interest was immediately piqued. "You have notes? From how long ago?" Bella nodded earnestly. "So I write down everything when we visit. Percy started trying to tell me things weeks ago, but I didn't understand at first. Then I started noticing things too. How Alicia would cry when Nancy came near, how she would act different when she thought no one was watching." The detective gathered Bella's diary as evidence, praising her observant nature, but Percy remained agitated. There was still something else, something important they were missing. "Phone calls, night talks," he squawked insistently. "Others involved." This caught everyone's attention. The detective turned to Nancy, who had gone notably pale. "Other people involved. Care to explain?" Nancy's silence spoke volumes. The detective signaled to his partner, who began reviewing the call logs from Nancy's seized phone. The numbers told a disturbing story, regular calls to multiple burner phones, all during late-night hours. "Shaji is part of a network," Paul realized, his voice heavy with horror. She was not working alone. As if confirming his words, Nancy's phone suddenly lit up with a message. Before anyone could stop her, she managed to glance at it, and her composed mask slipped completely. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "You dunnot understand," she whispered, "all pretense gone. They will come for me. They always come for anyone who gets caught." The detective leaned forward. "Who will come for you, Nancy? Give us names and we can protect you." But Nancy shook her head violently. "You can, to protect me. Nobody can. They everywhere. Hospitals, childcare agencies, reference services. How do you think we get our credentials? How do you think we find our targets?" The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one malicious nanny. It was about an organized group targeting vulnerable families through seemingly legitimate channels. Percy, however, wasn't finished. He began rattling off more names, addresses, and fragments of conversations he'd overheard during Nancy's late-night calls. Each word was another piece of evidence, another thread unraveling a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The detective was furiously taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "We're going to need witness protection," he muttered to his partner, "for all of them." Paula's phone rang. It was Martha calling from the hospital. The examination had revealed traces of various substances in Alicia's system, but thankfully nothing had caused permanent damage. They had caught Nancy's scheme before she could fully implement her sinister plans. But as relief washed over the room, Percy noticed something that made his feathers stand on end. Nancy's fear had vanished, replaced by that calculating look he knew so well. She was watching the officer's catalogue evidence, her eyes tracking every bag, every document. The parrot suspected she was already planning her next move. "Watch her! Don't trust," Percy warned, drawing attention back to Nancy, just as her hand moved toward her collar. A sharp-eyed officer caught the movement and rushed forward, discovering a hidden needle. "Suicide pill," the officer announced, securing the evidence. Classic spy technique. She wasn't a T planning to live long enough to talk. This discovery changed everything. The detective immediately called for additional security. Nancy would need to be watched constantly, both to prevent her from harming herself and to protect her from whoever she was working with. As Nancy was led away in handcuffs, she passed by Percy's cage. For a brief moment their eyes met. In that instant, Percy saw something in her expression that chilled him to his core. This wasn't Tiova, not by a long shot. Back at the hospital, Martha held Alicia close, grateful for her safety, but shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. The baby was recovering well, her system already clearing the foreign substances Nancy had administered, but the psychological impacts would take longer to heal, both for Alicia and her parents. Julia arrived at the hospital with Bella, bringing updated news from the investigation. The police were uncovering more evidence with each passing hour. Nancy's USB drive, despite destroying local files, had left traces that computer forensics might be able to recover. More importantly, Bella's diary and Julia's recording provided solid evidence that couldn't be erased. But Percy, watching from his travel cage, Paul had insisted on bringing him to the hospital, knew there were still threads to unravel. Nancy's network was vast, and they had only scratched the surface. The parrot kept his vigilant watch, ready to protect his family from whatever dangers still lurked in the shadows. As night fell over the hospital, Martha made a decision. She had installed security cameras throughout their house, but had always felt it was unnecessary to put one in Alicia's room, trusting Nancy completely. That trust had nearly cost them everything. She vowed never to be so naive again. Percy settled into his temporary perch in Alicia's hospital room, his presence bringing comfort to both the baby and her parents. The parrot might have exposed one threat, but he sensed that their ordeal wasn't over. Somewhere out there, Nancy's associates were watching, waiting, planning their next move, and Percy would be ready when they made it. The investigation was expanding, reaching into dark corners of the childcare industry that few had suspected existed. But for now, in the quiet hospital room, Percy focused on what mattered most, keeping watch over the sleeping baby whose life he had helped save, while remaining alert for any sign of the storms he knew were still to come. The hospital room had become a temporary fortress. Officers were still stationed outside, and only pre-approved medical staff could enter. Alicia was recovering well, but Martha and Paul remained on high alert, scrutinizing every person who came near their daughter. Percy maintained his vigilant watch from his new perch, installed especially in the hospital room. His presence had a calming effect on Alicia, who would smile and reach for the parrot whenever she was awake. The bond between them had grown stronger through their shared ordeal. Detective Mitchell, who had been assigned to lead the investigation, arrived with troubling news. "We've been digging into Nancy's background," he explained to Martha and Paul. "Everything about her, her credentials, her references, even her identity, it is all fabricated, but the forgeries are professional grade. This isn't the work of one person." Julia, who had taken temporary leave from her job to support her sister, was helping piece together the evidence from Bella's diary. "Look at this," she said, pointing to one of her daughter's entries. Bella wrote down something interesting Percy said weeks ago about Nancy, talking to someone about the next family, and moving up the coast. The detective's expression darkened. "That matches our theory," We've uncovered similar cases up and down the coastline. Wealthy families, mysterious nanny figures, children getting sick, money disappearing. But every time someone got close to making a connection, evidence would vanish and witnesses would go silent. Percy suddenly became agitated, hopping from foot to foot on his perch. "Phone in plant! Phone in plant!" he screeched, pointing his beak toward a decorative potted plant in the corner of the room. Detective Mitchell carefully approached the plant and, reaching deep into the soil, pulled out a small burner phone. It was still warm, recently used. She must have hidden it during one of her hospital visits, Paul realized, remembering how Nancy had brought fresh flowers every few days, always insisting on arranging them herself. The phone was quickly sealed in an evidence bag, but Percy wasn't finished. More phones, home plant, office plant. The detective immediately dispatched officers to search all the planters in Martha and Paul S. home and offices. Each one yielded another hidden phone or recording device. Nancy had been monitoring them far more extensively than anyone had realized. Meanwhile, in the hospital's computer lab, tech experts were working to recover data from the virus-infected systems. Despite Nancy A.'s attempts to destroy everything, fragments of information remained. What they found was chilling. "It is a complete surveillance operation," the lead technician explained. "She wasn't just monitoring your activities. She was gathering information about your colleagues, your patients, your banking habits. Everything about your lives was being catalogued and analyzed." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. "But why? Why go to such lengths?" "Because you weren't the only targets," Detective Mitchell explained. "We've identified similar surveillance patterns at other hospitals up the coast. They were profiling medical professionals, doctors, surgeons, specialists, people with high incomes, demanding schedules, and young children." Paul Dadda's medical training kicked in as he processed this information. They were looking for specific vulnerabilities, families where both parents work long hours, where they need to rely heavily on childcare. "Exactly," the detective confirmed, "and they repatient. They spend months, sometimes years, gathering intelligence before making their move." Percy, who had been listening intently, suddenly perked up. "Window! Look, window!" Everyone turned to the hospital room, window. In the building across the street, a figure quickly ducked out of sight. Detective Mitchell immediately radioed for officers to search the building, but Percy A.'s warning had come too late. By the time they reached the opposite building, they found only an abandoned camera setup and a half-drunk cup of coffee, still warm. They were being watched. The discovery prompted immediate action. The hospital room was moved to an interior location with no windows. Security was doubled, but the incident had shaken everyone's sense of safety. That evening, as Alicia slept peacefully in her new room, Martha watched Percy standing guard. The parrot hadn't relaxed his vigilance for a moment, his head turning at every sound, his bright eyes scanning constantly for threats. "You've been protecting her all along, haven't it you?" she whispered to Percy, "even before we knew there was danger." Percy bobbed his head once, then spoke with unexpected clarity. "Family protect family." The simple statement brought tears to Martha's eyes. She reached out and gently stroked Percy's feathers. Yes, we do. And you're a family too." Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding. Detective Mitchell had set up a command center in an unused hospital conference room. Maps covered the walls, showing locations of similar cases connected by red strings. Photos of suspected network members, most only partially glimpsed on security cameras, were grouped together, forming a shadowy organizational chart. But it was Bella's diary that provided the most crucial breakthrough. Her childish entries, faithfully recording Percy's warnings and her own observations, contained details that might otherwise have been missed. She had noted down snippets of phone conversations, descriptions of visitors, even small changes in Alicia's behavior that adults had overlooked. "Look at this," Julia said, pointing to one entry. Bella wrote that a few weeks ago, Percy became very upset when a delivery man came to the house. She thought it was strange because he usually likes visitors. The detective quickly cross-referenced the date. There was no scheduled delivery that day. None of your regular services reported being in your neighborhood. Paul frowned. Someone was scouting the house, probably documenting security measures, escape routes. The detective's voice trailed off as he noticed Percy's increasing agitation. The parrot was pacing on his perch, clearly distressed. "Coming soon, he warned. Before anyone could question what he meant, the hospital's lights flickered and went out. Emergency generators kicked in immediately, but in those few seconds of darkness, Percy's warning took on a new urgency. They were about to discover that Nancy's network wasn't just watching. They were preparing to act. The question was, would Percy's warnings be enough to protect Alicia and his family from what was coming? The hospital's emergency generators cast an eerie glow through the corridors. In Alicia's room, Percy's agitation reached new heights. They hear! He screeched, his eyes fixed on the door. Detective Mitchell immediately radioed for backup, but the response was garbled. Someone was jamming their communications. In the confusion, a figure in hospital scrubs slipped into the room, moving with practiced efficiency. But Percy was ready. The moment the intruder reached for Alicia's crib, the parrot launched himself from his perch. Wings spread wide, creating enough of a distraction for Paul to tackle the would-be kidnapper. More officers rushed in, and the intruder was quickly subdued. When they removed the surgical mask, everyone gasped. The face belonged to one of Nancy's regular references, a woman who had vouched for her credentials. She was part of the network. "It is over," Detective Mitchell declared, securing the suspect. "We've got her accomplice." But Percy remained agitated. More coming," he warned. He was right. The power outage had been a coordinated effort across the hospital. Security cameras caught glimpses of other figures in scrubs, all converging on their location. The network was making its move, determined to silence Nancy's victims before she could expose them. What they hadn't counted on was Bella. The young girl, who had been staying with her mother in a nearby room, had continued her habit of taking notes. She had noticed and recorded suspicious activities throughout the hospital, staff members she didn't recognize, maintenance workers in areas they shouldn't be, unusual patterns in shift changes. Thanks to her observations, the police were able to quickly identify and apprehend the infiltrators. One by one, the fake hospital staff were caught, each arrest revealing more about the network's operations. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The USB drive that had initially seemed to destroy evidence had actually created a hidden backup, automatically uploading data to a secure server. The virus had been a smokescreen designed to make the network think their tracks were covered. Nancy, it turned out, had been playing both sides. While working for the criminal network, she had also been gathering evidence against them, building her own insurance policy. When cornered, she had activated the backup, ensuring that if she went down, she wouldn't go down alone. The final confrontation came as dawn broke over the hospital. The network's leadership, realizing their operation was compromised, made one last desperate attempt to contain the situation. But they had underestimated the power of a family united in protection of their youngest member. Percy, ever vigilant, spotted the final intruder, the network's leader, attempting to access the hospital through a service entrance. His warning allowed the police to set up a perfect ambush, and the mastermind behind the operation was finally captured. In the aftermath, the full scope of the network's activities came to light. They had been operating for years, targeting wealthy families across the country. Nancy's detailed records combined with Bella's diary entries and Percy's testimony, carefully translated and documented, provided enough evidence to dismantle the entire organization. Alicia's examination revealed that thanks to Percy's early warnings, she had suffered no lasting effects from Nancy's treatments. The psychological trauma would take time to heal, but surrounded by love and support, her natural resilience began to shine through. Martha and Paul made significant changes to their lives. They adjusted their work schedules to spend more time at home, and when they did need childcare, they implemented rigorous verification processes. But more importantly, they learned to trust their instincts and to listen to those who showed genuine care for their family. Percy was hailed as a hero. His story made headlines, highlighting the remarkable bond between animals and humans and the importance of paying attention to their warnings. But for Percy, the greatest reward was simply being with his family, watching Alicia grow stronger each day. Bella's diary became a crucial piece of evidence in multiple cases, and her observant nature earned her special recognition from the police department. Her experience inspired her to start a peer support group for children to help them recognize and report suspicious behavior. Julia and her family moved closer to Martha and Paul, strengthening their family bonds. The sisters realized that together they were stronger and better able to protect what mattered most. As for Nancy and her network, justice was served. The evidence was overwhelming, and the sentences were severe. The organization was dismantled, its members scattered or imprisoned. But perhaps more importantly, their exposure led to major reforms in childcare licensing and verification processes. One quiet evening, as the family gathered in their newly secured home, Percy watched Alicia playing safely on the floor. The baby looked up at her feathered protector and smiled, a pure, joyful expression that made all their trials worthwhile. "Our family's safe now," Percy declared softly, settling onto his perch. Martha smiled, reaching out to stroke his feathers. "Yes, Percy, thanks to you, we're all safe now." Alicia grew into a happy, healthy child, with no memory of her early trauma, but the story of Percy the parrot who saved her became a cherished family legend, passed down as a testament to the power of love, vigilance, and the unexpected heroes who sometimes enter our lives. The experience changed them all. They learned that real family isn't just about blood relations. It is about the bonds we forge through trust, protection, and unconditional love. And sometimes those bonds can come from the most unexpected sources, like a brave parrot who refused to stay silent in the face of danger. Percy remained their faithful guardian, his watchful eyes never wavering in their protection of the family he loved. His warnings had not only saved Alicia, but had exposed a darker side of the childcare industry, leading to changes that would protect countless other families in the future. And so, their story became one of hope, proof that even in our darkest moments, heroes can emerge from unexpected places, and love can triumph over evil, as long as we have the courage to listen and act when warnings come our way. In the years that followed, Martha started a foundation dedicated to improving childcare safety standards. Paul established a support network for families who had been victims of similar schemes. Julia wrote a children's book based on Percy's heroism, teaching kids about the importance of speaking up when they see something wrong. The criminal network, once stretching across multiple states, was completely dismantled. The investigation led to the arrest of over 30 individuals involved in the scheme, including several who had infiltrated legitimate childcare agencies and medical facilities. The evidence collected from Nancy's backup files proved instrumental in securing convictions for the ringleaders. During the trials, a disturbing pattern emerged. The organization had specifically targeted high-earning medical professionals with demanding work schedules, seeing them as vulnerable due to their reliance on outside childcare. Many of these families had never realized the danger they had narrowly escaped. For some of the network members, including Nancy, the motivation had been purely financial. For others, it went deeper, twisted resentment against successful people they perceived as neglectful parents. The leader, exposed as a former pediatric nurse who had lost her license years ago for medical negligence, had channeled her bitterness into building a criminal enterprise. Detective Mitchell was promoted for his role in breaking the case. He made it a point to visit the family regularly, often bringing treats for Percy. "He is not just a parrot," the detective would say. "He is the best witness I've ever had." The security measures implemented in the family's home became less about fear and more about prudent caution. The cameras remained, but they weren't watched with the same anxious vigilance. Percy still kept his watch, but his alerts became increasingly rare as the threats receded. Alicia developed a special bond with her feathered guardian. As she grew, she would often sit near his perch, reading him stories from her picture books. Percy would listen attentively, occasionally offering a word of encouragement or making a sound effect that would send Alicia into fits of giggles. The psychological evaluations showed that despite the early trauma, Alicia was developing normally. The swift intervention and the consistent, loving care afterward had prevented lasting damage. The specialists attributed much of her recovery to the stable, protective environment created by her family, Percy included. Bella Or's diary, which had provided such crucial evidence, became the inspiration for a safety program in schools, teaching children how to recognize and report concerning behavior. Her observant nature, once just a personal trait, became a skill she helped cultivate in others. Julia and Martha's bond as sisters grew even stronger. The ordeal had reminded them of the importance of family connections, of staying involved in each other's lives. Their children grew up more like siblings than cousins, creating a tight-knit extended family. The reforms triggered by the case reached far beyond just childcare. Medical facilities implemented stricter controls on medications, especially those that could be misused. Background check systems were overhauled to prevent falsified references from slipping through. Parents became more vigilant, more willing to trust their instincts when something didn't feel right. Percy's fame eventually faded from public memory, but within the family his place was forever secure. On his perch in the living room, he continued his watch, his amber eyes missing nothing. His vocabulary expanded over time, but certain phrases remained constants. Family safe, watch carefully, love you. One evening, as Alicia slept peacefully in her room, Martha sat with Percy, reflecting on how close they had come to losing everything, and how this extraordinary bird had saved them all. "How did you know, Percy?" she asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. "How did you understand what was happening?" Percy ruffled his feathers, tilting his head in that thoughtful way of his. After a moment, he spoke with perfect clarity. "Hearts see what eyes miss." Martha smiled, recognizing the phrase from one of Paul's favorite sayings. Yet in Percy's voice, it seemed to hold a deeper truth, that love sharpens perception, that caring for others makes us more alert to threats against them, that the bonds of family, however formed, are the strongest protection of all. Outside, the world continued its hurried pace. Inside, watched over by their unlikely guardian, the family thrived in the safety that had been so fiercely won and so carefully maintained. And Percy, from his perch, kept his vigilant watch, not out of fear, but out of love, the most powerful guardian of all. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.